interview Graham Nash, head of the arts department at Anglican Church Grammar School, also known as Churchie. As head of arts at Churchie, what has your curriculum responsibility been to promote the arts, and how have you done this in the past 16 years?
The arts for me here has, when I first came here as head of faculty, was the visual arts, film and television department in the senior school, drama and music. First priority for me was to grow the media department. I wanted to be able to teach a full range of arts down through the middle school. It was important to upgrade the arts to be more than just a doing activity, more than just making stuff. It was about learning stuff as well. And over a period of time we were looking to expand, if you like, the academic credentials of arts education here. For doing that, it was complex. What I felt I needed to do was raise the profile of the arts within the school community. Now, on a very trite level, the first thing I did was buy the cheapest range of Filipino shirts that you could imagine. I stood out everywhere. It was a simple device to get the new boy on the block in the arts a higher profile. We extended and developed the Churchie Emerging Art Show and kept that alive for a long time. Well, kept it alive until now and have grown it to what it is today. A very significant show, very good indicator of young careers. One of the works on the wall behind you is by Scott Redford, who opened at QAG a couple of nights ago. Scott won the Emerging Art Show with that, I think in '88, and still talks about that event as being significant in his career. What that did for us was, first of all, we had a range of current, quality, contemporary practice in the school environment that the entire school community could see. I could take students to it, but it also grew an interest in the larger community. It also allowed artists to become familiar with us, and they would then come and work with us and work with our students. So that was one device. We ran subject association conferences here, where we didn't charge the subject association for hire of the facilities because I was allowed to bring my Year 12 students into the workshops as a contra deal. So we did all of those sorts of things to grow the arts in the curriculum.
Thanks for that, Graham. The Draft Arts National Curriculum paper has been released and is open for review for the public to make comments and send responses to ACARA before the 17th of December. Without giving your whole response, could you please summarise what you think?
I think it's a flawed paper. I've been heavily involved with the national curriculum prior to the arts being included. The review of arts education called First We See, that Diana Davies wrote a couple of years ago, I think released in 2008. And it had been on the back burner for years. I'd worked with for a long time. I'd worked with the group then promoting that paper to federal government to have the arts included. I have more emails than you want to know about hitting my screen about the debates on the national curriculum. But simply, my objection is that the arts in the national curriculum should build on existing practice. I don't think that happens. I don't think it builds on existing strengths. It focuses on adjusting what it sees as weaknesses in current practice, but not building on strengths. And that can be divisive, and I think if you look at the current debate, it is divisive. I think there's a flaw when the initial Makicha, the Ministerial Council of Education Ministers, indicated their support for the national curriculum, as it was then, now the Australian curriculum. There's a visual and performing arts split. Somewhere in the ACARA processes, that became the arts. And it seems to me that if there is a visual and performing arts separation, and we add what is missing. And my second point is what is missing from the arts curriculum is consideration of design. And that within the visual arts, I would see that there is art, design and media. Media is not taught all the way around the country, and it should be, and it should never be seen as part of English. It's not a literature study. It's very much about the process, as you're doing, making and putting together using technology for purposes of communication. And I would see those three things sitting as a visual arts component, and within a performing arts component, given that I manage the performing arts here as well, although we don't do dance, we will be in some stage in the future, I'm certain, drama, dance and music. ACARA could mandate all of those 6 areas and saying that both the visual arts and the performing arts have to be done. All 6 areas have to be dealt with, but then within the visual arts, some areas could be privileged in a particular educational community, and with the performing arts likewise, so that where existing strengths were, they could be developed, but they are being added to as well as being developed. I don't think it takes account of contemporary educational practice, theoretical practice. I think it's dodgy in that area, and I think the consultation period is far too short. I mean, part of that's out of ACARA's hands. They didn't know there was going to be a national election, but when we looked at the first presentations in Sydney in May and hammered it heavily for this arts mix that started to become apparent at that stage. We'd not heard about it before. But the gap between then and the shape paper that eventually came out in October, delayed as it might have been before because of an election, so that from October to 17th of, it must have been late October that it came out, or at least mid. So there's a 2 months consultation period, not long enough, particularly at the end of an academic year, particularly when it runs into holiday periods around the country.
Graham, can you quickly summarise for us what the role of INSEA is?
It's seen as a means of lifting the educational base across the world. That was one of the ways Reed saw the arts in education. INSEA's charter out of that is to grow that association of world's arts educators. And we do that through intellectual debate, through publication, through conference.
How has the Australian Professional Association of Visual Arts Teachers at Education Australia worked with this international body to promote high-quality arts education through the world?
EA, which in a previous life was the Australian Institute of Art Education, and has had a long association with INSEA. Its preeminent members have been on the World Council, and indeed at about this moment in Malden in Victoria we were burying one of those significant players, Dr. Jeff Hammond, a really major player in both Australian art education and in INSEA, and a good mentor. There's a lot of people been involved through AEA into INSEA in its management processes. There have been 2 World Congresses in Australia of INSEA, the last one in Brisbane in '99. We are currently, the AEA is currently pitching, more or less accepted, to hold the 2014 conference in Melbourne. Worth going to, it'll be brilliant. And a number of regional conferences around Australia over the last decade or so has been crucial to that. Significant players in international art education theory are Australians. Professor Anne Bamford, Doug Borton, Graham Sullivan, Paul Duncombe, none of whom work in Australia anymore. Significant international academics. One of the major players internationally in visual literacy would be Anne. Significant people. They're no longer in Australia, but they have all grown through AEA.
It would seem that the draft arts curriculum has divided the arts curriculum into 3 organising strands: generating, which represents the thinking stage of artistic production; realising, which represents the making of artistic product, and responding, which is concerned with what is described as aesthetic knowledge and how we apprehend and comprehend art. It seems from this division that the whole body of knowledge related to art history and the appreciation of visual arts through the ages has been ignored. What do you have to say about this?
I have a real problem with the one-size-fits-all. In the various art forms around the country, there are 3 or 4 organisers that people talk about, and they tend to be around the practice of that arts form, to try and find a language that is appropriate for all. Doesn't succeed. And then if the word was there, it might allow for sufficient random interpretations to cover things. But once you start to define it, you leave things out. I would rather see that area of curriculum use a body of words, a group of words that are appropriate for some and not for others. I think the area of knowledge is important in here, and I think the ability to develop analytical and critical thinking is important in here, and I'm not certain that responding does that for me. I like it. I know that's a trite response, but I think we've got to be careful that we don't allow the trite response to tick the box.
In terms of media art, there is little point simply making media and then delving into aesthetic questions about what is film and how to critique it, without knowing the history of cinema in its various cultural contexts. What do you think about this, Graham?
We teach a compulsory media unit in Year 7 and 8. We have some elective studies in Year 9, which is more about film production. We're extending that media process, and then we have a really highly developed film and television department. Stephen Taggart, who's head of film and television here last year, was Atom's National Teacher of the Year. I think we take media studies here very, very seriously. I think it's crucial that students, and particularly boys, learn by doing. I mean, I've got a lot of Macs in the department here and a lot of camera equipment, and I convinced the funding authorities' boys and toys argument. But we've got to do something with it, and it goes back to you have to be teaching with it. My boys will always learn well when they're making. What they learn then as we advance through is that deeper cultural understanding of form, history, where images come from. They have to understand that they haven't invented that shot. That shot has a history, and it's got some cultural resonance for people when they see it. It's not just their first pull. I think it's crucial that there be knowledge in the back of all of these arts programs, and that knowledge is coloured and enriched by critical analysis. Okay.
How do you see design fitting into the arts curriculum?
I once trained as an architect. I have a son who's a stage designer. I know the bodies of knowledge, the processes of thinking, the activities of making that fit in all of that. And it is no different from my practice as an artist. I can see it as an art in its own right. And my structure is one I outlined before. I would have 3 arts in the visual arts, one of which would be design. And if you look to the New South Wales situation, you'll see design in their curricular documents. If you look at the draft shape paper, you'll see visual arts and design. If they could have written in a lower typeface and in a fainter ink type, they probably would have done so. It doesn't sit in that, for me, in that paper with anything other than a token afterthought.
Okay, thank you very much for your time, Graham. I think you've given us all a lot to think about.